He is the chief of the urology department, Department of VA Medical Center in Lexington. And ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege to present to you a veteran still serving veterans. Would you welcome Dr. David Preston?
Thank you, Pat. I know you all may be wondering how a urologist came to be your guest speaker today. And no, I won't be talking about kidney stones or prostate disorders, thank goodness. But I do have the best job in the world, and that is taking care of veterans. I couldn't ask. I love getting up and going to work every day. I want to thank you all for inviting me here to speak today at Camp Nelson National Cemetery on Memorial Day 2013. It's a privilege and an honor to be here. I also want to give credit to my 12-year-old son, Wesley, who motivated me to keep working on my speech. And he kept saying, "Dad, do you have it ready? Do you have it ready? It's only a week left. Now it's only 48 hours. What are you going to do?" And to be honest with you, I don't think it's going to be too difficult because I'm speaking from the heart and from memory. I do have some notes here, but what I have to say to you today is true, and it's from memory and from my heart. And it also may be painful for some of you all to hear what I have to say. It was painful for me to write some of these things down and to revisit some of these things. But first I'll talk a little bit about the history of Memorial Day. It has many origins, and was observed in many southern and northern states after the Civil War to remember those who had given their lives in defense of the nation. First official observance was on May 30th, 1868, after a proclamation by General John Logan. And on this day, flowers were placed on the graves of Confederate and Union soldiers at Arlington National Cemetery. And this was perhaps the beginning of a healing and reconciliation after a long and painful Civil War. Memorial Day was always observed on May 30th until Congress passed the National Holiday Act of 1971, making the day of observance the last Monday in May. So again, first, I know the words that I will say today can never do justice or give the honor and reverence due to those who bravely gave their lives in defense of this great nation. It's because of them we're here today, and let us never, ever forget their sacrifice. When I was first asked to deliver this message today, I had hesitation. I had fears and reservations about speaking to a group this large on such an important day. I was very comfortable giving medical lectures and talks, but an address on this scale was intimidating. But after serious thought about what this invitation meant, I humbly accepted. So what can I say that you will remember the fallen on this day? First, did you know that more than 1 million Americans have given their lives in defense of our nation? I decided it would be most fitting to tell you about 2 of those million who gave their lives, their stories of personal courage and ultimate sacrifice witnessed during my combat service. I will also tell you of 2 soldiers who nearly died, but who lived through a series of miracles and heroics. Finally, I want to tell you what a great place America is and why we should forever stand fast to defend it. So remember back, if you can, to March of 2003, when the United States invaded Iraq. I had spent all my years in the Army either training or performing peacetime medical practice. Now it seemed unreal, but I was going to war. I was stationed at Fort Carson, Colorado, and I was on alert for many months before the call finally came to report to the base for deployment. I reported at midnight to the base, and I left my wife and 3 children behind. It was hard to believe this was really happening and that it was possible I might not see my family again. Excuse me. I made a video recording. And then that night, just in case I didn't go home. Excuse me, I'm sorry, I have to gather myself. So we loaded the plane, and 24 hours later, we were in Kuwait. As with any military operation, there's lots of hurry up and wait, but I discovered that would end quickly. Before the boredom could set in, I found myself, thank you. Okay. I found myself dropped in a place about 40 miles northeast of Baghdad. Chinook helicopter dropped me and my duffel bags off at the landing zone. I suddenly was reminded of a scene from Forrest Gump. When Forrest and Bubba are dropped off at their base in Vietnam to be greeted by Lieutenant Dan, who asked if they were twins. The only difference was I didn't have a twin. I was in desert camouflage and I was dropped in the desert, not in the jungle. And I didn't have on OD green. Veterans here will remember that. Sergeant picked me up in a Humvee and dropped me off at my sleep tent to join 20 other guys who were already there. Well, as fate would have it, I was the ranking officer in the surgery department on my arrival. I was charged with the duty of chief of surgery in this busy combat support hospital. My job was to ensure the operating room could run 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. I was responsible for all the personnel in the department, and I soon discovered there was a lot of boredom and downtime during the day. But things always got busy at night. We received casualties almost every night from firefights and bombings. It was too hot during the day for the insurgents to be active. They preferred the cool and the stealth of the night. Anyway, story number one begins with a fire base near our hospital. A young lieutenant led his patrol out from the fire base to investigate enemy activity and gunfire in the area. The patrol came under attack and the casualties were brought immediately to our doors. I was the doctor on duty that night, and 3 soldiers arrived injured, but they were stable, and 1 was a sergeant team leader. The lieutenant patrol leader had been killed in action and was in an ambulance just outside the trauma bay. It was my job I'm sorry. It was my job to pronounce him dead and sign his death certificate. This was hard for me. I've done it many times before for my patients that died of cancer. But this was different. I climbed back into the steps of the ambulance door. It was me and the lieutenant in the ambulance with the dim lights inside. He was wrapped in a blanket and he had a breathing tube in place and he had no signs of life. I was trying to understand and deal with the shock and pain of a life so young cut short. I tried to humanize my task. I noticed he was 25 years old. He wore a wedding ring on his left hand. How awful that his wife would have to be told. I prayed and I asked God to give me courage to do my duty and to show this man proper respect. I went on and performed my duty to determine if he was dead, and indeed he was. I didn't realize a harder task lay ahead. I returned to the trauma bay, and the sergeant asked me if the lieutenant made it, and I had to tell him the bad news: the lieutenant was dead. The sadness and emotion was deep. I could only survive this by trying to help the remaining injured, and that's what I did. Story number 2 is short but dramatic. During one of my nights on duty, I received a young medic who had lost his arm from a rocket-propelled grenade attack. He had been stabilized by one of the forward surgical teams, and his arm amputation was completed and dressed before he was evacuated to us. He arrived on a ventilator and he was sedated. We kept him stable overnight. We took him to surgery the next day to complete his washout and debridement of his amputated arm and his wounds, and then we prepared him for evacuation to Germany. The most amazing part of the story is a sergeant who saved his life by using his belt as a tourniquet on the medic's arm. His quick action saved the medic's life. Story number 3 is
is about ethics, life and decisions, and people giving their all for another. About midway through my deployment, we received a sergeant who had been injured in an IED attack. He had significant bleeding and required large amounts of blood transfusions. His injuries involved a deep artery in his thigh, which we could not locate despite several explorations in the operating room. As fast as we could pour the blood in him, he would lose it. We finally came to a point where we were about to exhaust our hospital blood supply. We had 30 pints on hand at any time, so we had to make a decision. Would we risk our entire hospital blood supply to save one life and did not have blood for other incoming casualties? Our commander convened an ethics board and decided we made a decision that we would have to let the soldier die, and we'd have no more blood for the other casualties. It's then that a series of miracles happened. We decided the only way to save the soldier was to use whole blood. This was an older practice most of us were not familiar with. Up until that point, we used donated blood that was shipped in, frozen from out of theater, and then we thawed it for combat use. We sent out a message over the base we needed more blood for this soldier, so many soldiers showed up to donate, and we had to turn some away, so our blood problem was solved. The second miracle was a timely piece of arrival of a new piece of equipment, something so simple as a portable x-ray machine, a C-arm, which everybody has a CAT scanner now, but those were the days. We were able to perform an arteriogram and find the bleeding artery and stop the bleeding and save the sergeant's life. He was evacuated to Germany. Story number 4 is my final story and begins on September 11, 2003. We were expecting bad things that day, being it was the second anniversary of the 9/11 attacks in the United States. Insurgent attacks usually escalated around significant anniversaries and religious holidays. Unfortunately, on this day, there were no major attacks, but there were a steady flow of accidents. A soldier arrived in our ER who was severely injured by the explosion of a Black Hawk helicopter tire. It hit him in the chest and ruptured the major blood vessels to his heart. There was little we could do as he died in our emergency room. It was sad to see his junior soldiers crying loudly in the trauma bay as we were trying to save him. They were there during the explosion and they only had minor injuries. If I told you I left this deployment and combat support hospital unaffected, I'd be lying. I'll share with you the words of our chaplain from one Sunday morning service that helped me tremendously. During prayers, he reminded us all of the honor and reverence of our duty. He acknowledged the great sadness when we were the first to know of a fallen soldier's death, and he prayed for families who would receive the terrible news in a few days. These 4 short stories of sacrifice and sadness, highs and lows, bring together the meaning of Memorial Day for me. To know that people still love and care enough for this country, our way of life, and what America stands for, that they would give their lives for it is incredible. We are thankful. I'm thankful. We should all know and understand that we live in the greatest and freest country on earth. You need only travel to other countries in the world to understand what I mean. Nowhere do you have the choices, the freedoms, and the rights you have here in America. I don't believe I need to tell the group gathered here today what Memorial Day is about and who we're here to honor. Certainly there's nothing wrong with an all-American cookout today and fireworks and a ball game. I just ask you to remind your family and friends and your co-workers this isn't just any other 3-day weekend, but a somber day of remembrance to honor those who paid the ultimate price for our freedom. We shall never forget them, and we are forever grateful. They knew that freedom is not free. On behalf of a grateful nation, I want to again express my deep gratitude to the fallen heroes, but also want to acknowledge the surviving family members and friends of the fallen. Would you please stand to be recognized? I want to thank you again for allowing me to speak. Finally got my composure here at the end of the address, but thank you.
very much, and I just ask God's blessing on you in the United States of America. Thank you.